A three-judge panel of the Federal Appeals Court in Washington, D.C. released a unanimous opinion last week saying that Donald Trump is not immune from criminal prosecution for his attempt to stay in power after he lost re-election. And when they issued that ruling, they also tried to box him in to what he could do next. They tried to box him into appealing straight to the U.S. Supreme Court. They said, the way they ruled, they said that if Trump tried to come back to that same appeals court, if he tried to make that same court take another turn with that same case, Trump would risk the whole process speeding up, which is the last thing he wants. They said if he came back to the appeals court instead of just going straight to the Supremes, his trial on this issue would effectively be unfrozen. It would get put back on the calendar, all systems go. He might end up in court sooner than he wants to. Well, today Donald Trump did go to the Supreme Court, but he asked them to overrule that part of the appeals court ruling where they were trying to get him to speed up the process. He's asking the Supreme Court to allow him additional review from that same appeals court. He wants to be able to go to all 11 judges on that D.C. appeals court instead of just the three-judge panel that gave him the ruling thus far. And he wants to be able to do that before he appeals to the Supreme Court without risking his trial starting up as punishment. He argued in his filing with the court tonight that this court should stay this unprecedented and unacceptable departure from ordinary appellate procedures and allow President Trump's claim of immunity to be decided in the ordinary course of justice. This filing tonight from Trump and his lawyers seems to be their way of trying kind of a bank shot. They're insisting that he should get yet more review in the appeals court in D.C. before he inevitably appeals to the United States Supreme Court. He's always playing for more delay, always playing for more procedure, always playing for more time. Well, how strong is this play? How strong is his case for this? And if the Supreme Court does grant him what he's asking, what would that mean for the timing of his big federal criminal trial for trying to stay in office after he was voted out? Joining us now is Chuck Rosenberg, former U.S. attorney, senior FBI official. Chuck, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
My pleasure, Rachel.
Did I explain the basics of that correctly, that he is trying to effectively get the Supreme Court to take away that rushing tactic, that tactic by which the appeals court was trying to tell him, you got to end this appeals process at some point and get to trial?
Yes, good description. I mean, think of it conceptually this way. Three-step ladder. Step one would be the trial court. That's where the prosecutors want to be. That's where a jury would be seated, the trial would be conducted, and a verdict rendered. Prosecutors want to be there, and Mr. Trump does not. Step two on that ladder would be the appellate court, where he recently lost unanimously on his claim of absolute immunity. And what he'd like to do now is either be on rung number three, step three, the Supreme Court, or back in the appellate court. But by all means, Rachel, to avoid step one, the trial court.
So this week is going to be kind of nuts. I think we can all agree. Former President Donald Trump started the week today at a courthouse in Florida, federal courthouse. It was for a hearing in the federal criminal case against him related to his allegedly hiding classified documents at his Florida golf club and refusing to turn them over when he was asked for them. That's how his week started in the federal court in Florida. His week could end with a New York judge ousting him from running his family business and ordering him to pay hundreds of millions of dollars. That's the punishment New York's Attorney General is asking for in her fraud case against Trump and the Trump Organization. The New York Times reports today that the judge in that fraud case is expected to issue his verdict on Friday of this week. Again, that is just New York Times reporting. We have not confirmed that, but we're watching that as well. Judge Engoron could rule whenever he feels like it. Friday is also the deadline for Trump to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court to try to get the justices to throw out lawsuits against him from Capitol Police officers who were injured on January 6th. On Thursday, in New York, there will be a pivotal hearing in the hush money criminal case, in which the judge is expected to officially schedule the start of that New York state criminal trial. That trial could start as soon as next month. That could be the first criminal trial that Trump is actually in the courtroom for. Also on Thursday, Georgia prosecutor Fani Willis will be appearing at a hearing about whether or not she should be disqualified from her RICO case against Donald Trump in Georgia. Trump and some of his 14 co-defendants in Fani Willis's case in Georgia argue that she should be disqualified because she and one of the top prosecutors she hired for the case are involved in a personal romantic relationship. Now, Fani Willis has argued that nothing about that personal relationship is disqualifying. She's argued that Trump and his co-defendants are just using these allegations essentially as salacious distractions to try to muddy the waters and scuttle the case against them by creating a lot of public relations nonsense about this issue that has no legal consequence. That said, there was a hearing today on these allegations, and the judge in this case in Georgia said that these allegations against District Attorney Willis could result in Willis being disqualified from the case. And as such, he said he definitely wants to hear evidence on these allegations on Thursday of this week. So it all makes for a very, very busy week in terms of the legal part of our political news now. But it also puts District Attorney Fani Willis in quite a spot. I mean, regardless of what you or anybody else might think about Willis's personal relationship with this prosecutor and whether she did anything legally wrong here, the only person whose opinion really matters on that right now is the judge. And today in court, he did make clear, he did say explicitly that he thinks she might be disqualified from this case because of these allegations. Now, the key dynamic at work around this is that if Fani Willis is disqualified, fairly or unfairly, her whole office, the whole district attorney's office, is disqualified from working on that case, which would mean, in all likelihood, that whole case would go away. And that is why Georgia State University law professor Clark Cunningham argued in the New York Times last month that the best thing Fani Willis could do to protect her case against Trump and his RICO defendants in Georgia would be for her to take a leave of absence, for her to take a personal leave of absence from the district attorney's office to turn over the case to a deputy district attorney. That would end these proceedings against her effectively, and it would leave her office in charge of the case, and the case could still go forward. We contacted Professor Cunningham about this today, these new developments. He told us, quote, this action, meaning a personal leave by District Attorney Willis, should be looked at strategically as the best option she has to make this enormously distracting controversy go away and to put the case back on track, still in the control of the Fulton County DA's office. If Judge McAfee grants any of the motions to disqualify Willis at the hearing Thursday this week, then her option to take leave probably disappears at that point. Now, I should also mention the Washington Post is reporting tonight that Trump plans to attend that Thursday hearing in Georgia so he can be there in the courtroom as the details of this personal relationship between Fani Willis and this other prosecutor are laid out in open court. That should make it all the more of a circus. There will also, I believe, be cameras in that court proceeding. Don't quote me on that. But of course, Trump would like to be there regardless. Thursday night, a new interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin with a former Fox News host was posted online. You might have read that it started with Putin giving a long, inexplicable, and boring history lecture that went on and on and on and on and didn't seem to have a point, and that definitely lost most of its American audience. True, all true. Except for the part of the history lecture where Putin got to 1939, at which point he then claimed in this interview that it was Poland who started World War II. Poland did it, because even though Poland had cooperated with Hitler up to a point, they stopped cooperating with Hitler when Hitler really wanted them to cooperate more. And once that happened, Hitler had no choice. He just had to invade. And by the way, it was kind of doing Poland a favor. Exact same line. I mean, we haven't had someone trying to sell this line to an American audience since it happened the first time in 1939. Right, with Philip Johnson's quote-unquote reporting, right? When with him, we had a committed American fascist allied with the Nazis, openly rooting for them, trying to sell us this bill of goods. That happened in 1939. It hasn't happened since until now. And the reason Putin is trying to sell us, the American public, this bizarre line now is more worrying than it is interesting. It might be boring, but it is worrying. Here's Russian journalist Masha Gessen explaining it for an American audience in The New Yorker, in a piece that I really highly recommend that you take a look at if you can in The New Yorker. Gessen says this, quote, "I can't get one passage out of my mind. In the history lecture portion of the interview, when Putin got to 1939, he said, Poland cooperated with Germany, but then it refused to comply with Hitler's demands. Poles forced him. They overplayed their hand, and they forced Hitler to start the Second World War by attacking Poland. The idea, Gessen says, that the idea that the victim of the attack serves as its instigator by forcing the hand of the aggressor, that is central to all of Putin's explanations for Russia's war in Ukraine. Gessen says, though, to my knowledge, this is the first time Putin described Hitler's aggression in these same terms. Quote, the way Putin described the beginning of the Second World War in this interview suggests that in his mind, he might see himself as Hitler, but perhaps a wilier one who can make inroads into the United States and create an alliance with its presumed future president. It's telling, too, Gessen continues, that Putin took the time to accuse Poland of both allying with Nazi Germany and inciting Hitler's aggression. As he has done with Ukraine in the past, he's positioning Poland as the heir to Nazism. Putin mentioned Poland more than 30 times in this conversation with Mr. Carlson. If I were Poland, I'd be scared. End quote. Vladimir Putin is selling a new line to Americans. He's saying that Poland is the real aggressor that we should blame for World War II. And he's starting to use the same language, starting to cite the same weird reasons he used to justify invading Ukraine when he talks about Poland. And what's really, really important to understand about that is that Poland is a NATO country. They have been for 25 years now. And we're a NATO country too. And if Putin decides that he doesn't just want to invade Ukraine, which he's done twice now since 2014, and he doesn't just want to invade Georgia and Moldova as well, which he has also invaded, if he decides, as he is sort of threatening here, if he decides that he's going to start shooting at Poland now too, or trying to take land in Poland, that would be Putin and Russia attacking NATO, which would oblige the other 30 NATO countries in the world, including us, to come to their rescue against Russia. Or maybe not. Less than 48 hours after that interview posted online, former President Donald Trump, at a rally, said if he's president again, basically he would not honor that commitment. He appears to have made up a conversation with what he called the leader of a, quote, large NATO country, in which he says he told this leader that if that country were attacked by Russia, quote, no, I would not protect you. He said, quote, in fact, I would encourage them, meaning Russia, to do whatever the hell they want. As David Sanger wrote in the New York Times today, quote, the larger implication of his statement is that he, Trump, might invite President Vladimir Putin of Russia to pick off a NATO nation as a warning and a lesson to the 30 or so others in NATO about heeding Mr. Trump's demands. I have to stress here that Trump really did use the word encourage. He did not say that the United States would sit idly by in case Russia invaded a NATO ally. He said he would encourage Russia to go after one of our allies. He would encourage them. In other words, he would tell Russia to go take out one of our allies with the assurance that we do nothing to help. And this is happening within 48 hours of Putin telling a hand-picked interviewer which countries he thinks really have had it coming. And he's got one of them in NATO at the top of his list. But don't forget, President Biden is 3 years older than that guy, so obviously there's equally enormous risk in picking either of these candidates to be president of the United States. One is obviously old, one is also old and facing 91 felony charges and saying he will literally encourage Russia to expand its war to hit our allies, while Russia's dictator is signaling to an American audience that he plans to do just that. Lots of other countries, I'm sad to say it, but lots of other countries have to deal with former presidents and prime ministers facing criminal charges. It is awful and complicated and fraught, and nobody in this country wishes that we had to deal with that, but now we do. That said, take comfort in the fact that lots of other countries have had to deal with that one way or another. Maybe we can learn something from the lessons of how they've done it well or poorly. Lots of other countries have had to deal with criminal charges against leaders and would-be return leaders. But nobody is dealing with a would-be return president telling a dictator who's just invaded one of our allies to please go on and invade another. Pick one, go on, do it. For that one, that's us alone. Joining us now is former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. Ambassador McFaul was recently in Lithuania, where he had the opportunity to speak with some of that country's leaders. It has a little bit of insight into how this may be playing in our allies who are very much at the pointy end of the spear here in discussions like this. Ambassador McFaul, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Let me first ask you if you feel like any of the reaction to what President Trump said this weekend, the interpretation of what it means, its implications, if you feel like any of it's being misconstrued, or you feel like people are getting it the wrong way around, or do you feel like this is getting the right kind of response?
I'm shocked by how muted the response is. Just, you've said it several times tonight, Rachel. It is just completely shocking what he said. And the fact that we're not all, thank you, by the way, for devoting so much time in your program tonight on it. And thank you for making the connections to the 1930s, because this is a 1930s vibe. And when I was in Lithuania meeting with leaders, not just from Lithuania, but Poland, Latvia, Estonia, that's the metaphor they're using and talking about these terms. What's shocking to me is that we're all not shocked by it. We've become so used to Mr. Trump saying these outrageous things, and then it's just, oh, that's just Trump being Trump. But the fact that he said Russia, Putin, should invade one of our allies and he would encourage it is just outrageous, extraordinary. So that's the reaction that I think is strange to me, that there's not more people saying that, especially national security officials, former officials in the Republican Party, because I know that they agree with me, and I'm shocked that they're so silent tonight.
In Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, in Poland, in those countries, is there a sense that this is more than just uncouth, that this is something that there's a real threat here, that Putin is actually sort of testing whether or not he can cross yet another border, that he can start military action against yet another country?
Without question. Publicly, leaders from those countries have said it. Behind closed doors, they say it with even more emotion in their voice. And here's the scenario they worry about. Right now, Russia is stuck fighting a difficult, stalemated war in Ukraine. Thank goodness that they haven't achieved greater objectives, and we need to help them, so that the Ukrainians, so that they don't. But they worry what happens 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, when Russia has greater capability, and we, because Mr. Trump comes to power, are no longer interested in defending our NATO allies. And they talk very openly about what will we have to do if the United States is not there to help us. They talk very openly about how the Soviet Union was weak in 1941 when Hitler invaded, but came back roaring in 1943, 44, 45. And they talk very explicitly about, will the United States recognize the Article 5 commitment that we have in NATO to defend them? And if we don't, which coalition of countries will have to do it on their own? Now, I hope they're wrong, and I think it's important to understand and underscore that so far, Russia and the Soviet Union has never attacked a NATO country. That's the good news. But the fact that they're having these conversations is deeply troubling, exacerbated then by what Mr. Trump just said a few days ago.
And some of the response has been sort of leavened on the Republican side. And I'm thinking principally here about Senator Marco Rubio, but also some other Republicans who have said, hey, listen, we passed a law that says the Senate has to give permission if a president ever wants to get us out of NATO in the future. This is, like you said, Trump just being Trump. This isn't a real risk. I feel like that may be true on paper, but the risk is that the green light is given once an American commitment is questioned on American soil by a would-be American leader, that legally it doesn't necessarily matter, that the green light has been given, that the signal has been given, that the security umbrella has been removed, regardless of legalistically whatever happens as a consequence of Trump's remarks. Is that a fair assessment?
That's exactly right, Rachel, which is to say, yeah, the law's there. We're not going to withdraw from NATO. But if a NATO country is attacked, especially if it's an ambiguous attack, right? Not tanks rolling to Tallinn, but something strange. And then Trump says, I don't care because they didn't pay us. That's when NATO begins to crumble with or without that law in place.